right. Anarchists. Despite the force and unquestionably positive character of anarchist ideas, despite the clarity and completeness of anarchist positions with regard to the social revolution, and despite the heroism and countless sacrifices of anarchists in the struggle for anarchist communism, it is very telling that in spite of all this, the anarchist movement has always remained weak and has most often featured in the history of working class struggles, not as a determining factor, but rather as a fringe phenomenon. So begins the introduction to the organizational platform for the General Union of Anarchists. Perhaps this is not the most inspiring introduction, but it spells out the motivation for the authoring of the pamphlet. The organizational platform for the General Union of Anarchists is the founding text of a movement within anarchism called Platformism. It was released in 1926 by a group called Dielo Truda, which translates from Russian into workers' cause. Dielo Truda operated out of Paris and was made up of Russian anarchists who were in exile. Notable among them was Nestor Makhno, previously the commander of the Peasant Revolutionary Insurrectionary Army of Ukraine, the RIAU, which engaged in guerrilla warfare during the Russian Civil War. Makhno and his army managed for a time to establish a Ukrainian free territory organized under the principles of anarchism as set forth by Peter Kropotkin, with economics organized around the free exchange between rural and urban areas, supporting what they called free worker-peasant Soviets, and guaranteeing freedom of speech, press, assembly, and the like. Makhno's army at times fought alongside the Red Army, and at other times there was fierce antagonism between the two. Together, the RIAU and the Red Army managed to halt the advance of Pyotr Wrangel's White Army in Ukraine, and eventually defeat him altogether in 1920. Immediately thereafter, citing allegations that free Ukraine was a warlord state, the Bolsheviks ordered that the RIAU be disbanded and that its leaders be arrested and executed. Makhno managed to escape this fate, but was pursued by the Red Army, causing him to flee into Romania and eventually into France. Prior to Makhno's defeat, it is arguable that the anarchist movement was stronger in Russia than anywhere else in Europe. The leading proponents of anarchism, Mikhail Bakunin, Peter Kropotkin, Leo Tolstoy, and even Emma Goldman, were all Russian-born. Numerous anarchist communes existed in Russia, some of them following the Christian pacifist teachings of Leo Tolstoy, such as the Life and Labor Commune, which was a pacifist and vegetarian commune near Moscow, which was liquidated by the Bolshevik government and its members relocated to Siberia. After the defeat of the anarchist movement in Russia, certain anarchists began to ask themselves why their goals had failed to be realized. The common dismissal is to say that we would have been successful if only the Bolsheviks hadn't undermined us in the process. This answer may have been sufficient to many anarchists, but it was not for Makhno and or the Dielo Truda group. As Dielo Truda wrote in their letter to Malatesta, we have taken the habit of attributing the defeat of the anarchist movement of 1917 through 1919 in Russia to the Tsarist repression of the Bolshevik Party. This is a big mistake. The Bolshevik repression impeded the extension of the anarchist movement during the revolution, but it wasn't the only obstacle. It's rather an internal impotence of the movement itself, which was one of the principal causes of defeat. An impotence proceeding from the vagueness and indecision which characterized different political affirmations concerning organization and tactics. In drafting the organizational platform, Dielo Truda sought to rectify the state of affairs by clearly laying out what anarchist organization should look like, in a pragmatic and non-utopian manner. The underlying current of which was that anarchists should form themselves into one large union which is explicitly anarchist and which had a clear and unified program with regard to ideology and tactics. To do this, they proposed that the General Union should be explicitly and solely anarchist communist, and therefore the class struggle should be the most important facet of the anarchist idea. The organizational platform begins by stating that there is no single humanity. There is only humanity made up of classes, slaves, and masters. And that in social terms, the whole of human history represents a continuous chain of struggles waged by the working class in pursuit of their rights, freedom, and a better life. At all times throughout the history of human societies, this class struggle has been the principal factor determining the form and structure of those societies. They make this aspect of their thought even more prominent by rejecting the idea of anarchism as a humanitarian philosophy. The They felt that to credit anarchism with a general humanitarian character would be false and would inevitably result in the justification of the current order. Anarchism, they felt, was an ideology of the working masses to the exclusion of the non-laboring classes, and that the extent to which the non-laboring classes persist in a post-revolutionary society, the anarchist communist society would recognize no responsibility towards them, unless, of course, they decide to become productive and join that society. This is in contrast with the anarchist synthesis ideas of Volin and Sebastian Foy, who believed that anarcho-syndicalism, libertarian communism, and individualist anarchism should be blended to work alongside one another. Volin, also a Russian anarchist living in exile in France at the time, demanded a model of organization in which unionism is considered the method of social evolution, libertarian communism constitutes the organization of the new society, and individualism becomes the goal of post-revolutionary society, aiming at the emancipation and happiness of the individual. In his criticism of the platform, he stated that to maintain that anarchism is only a theory of classes is to limit it to a single viewpoint. The platformists came out vehemently against this kind of synthesis, particularly of the incorporation of individualists, whom they felt, with an eye to personal pleasure, cling stubbornly to the chaotic condition of the anarchist movement, and therefore hold it back from ever becoming a viable revolutionary movement. And that therefore, we reject as theoretically and practically unfounded the idea of creating an organization using the recipe of the synthesis, that is to say, bringing together the supporters of various strands of anarchism. Such an organization embracing a potpourri of elements in terms of their theory and practice would be nothing more than mechanical assemblages of persons with varying views on all issues affecting the anarchist movement, and would inevitably break up on encountering reality. The platformists uphold the necessity of a violent social revolution and the immediate abolition of the state. While agreeing with the Marxists that the state is the organized violence of the bourgeoisie against the workers, they disregard that this could be a tool in the hands of the proletariat, asserting that state power always goes hand in hand with exploitation and enslavement of the masses, and that it nurtures in the masses the slavish mentality of submission, expectation, and a belief in rulers and bosses. The platformists state that attempts to distinguish between anarcho-syndicalism and anarchist communism are silly. Anarcho-syndicalism could, for them, be understood as a tactic employed by anarchist communists to enter the radical labor unions while also being answerable to the general union of anarchists, which would be the explicitly anarchist political organization, which would provide guidance to the syndicalist unions, in this way preventing the movement from degenerating into mere trade unionism, pitting members of one union against another. The fundamental precepts of platformism can be summed up in the following fashion. 1, the recognition of the class struggle as a fundamental facet of anarchism. 2, that anarchist communism is the basis of this movement. 3, syndicalism is the primary method of the struggle. 4, that a general union of anarchists is needed based on tactical unity and ideological unity. And 5, that a positive program is needed to realize the social revolution. This brings us to the next aspect of the platform, in which they attempt to address the problems confronting the social revolution on day 1, which are production, consumption, the agrarian question, and the defense of the revolution. With regard to the revolution, they state, the country's productive machinery is a whole and belongs to the entire working class. This determines the character and form of the new system of production. It too is to be a united whole, common in the sense that the products manufactured by the producers will belong to everybody. These products, or of whatever type they may be, will represent the general supply fund for the workers, from which every participant in the new system of production will receive everything that they may need, on an equal footing with everyone else. To accomplish this, they propose the creation of specially created agencies, purpose-built by the working masses, workers' councils, workplace committees, or workers' administrations of factories and plants. These agencies, liaising with one another at the level of municipality, province, and then country, will make up the municipal, provincial, and thereafter general federal institutions for the management and administration of production. Appointed by the masses and continually subject to their supervision and control, These bodies are to be constantly renewed, thereby achieving the idea of genuine self-management of the masses. With regard to consumption, they state that the problem will undoubtedly arise early on that the towns will have a shortage of basic essentials and that the peasants will have an overabundance of that produce. To rectify this problem, they propose the close cooperation between these two classes of workers. In order to establish this cooperation, the urban working class, having assumed control of production, must immediately consider the basic needs of those in the countryside and endeavor to supply them with everyday consumer goods, as well as the means and instruments for collective cultivation of the land. Gestures of solidarity from the urban workers in fulfilling the needs of the peasants will elicit a like response, and in return the peasants will collectively supply the towns with the produce of rural production.